The blood-curdling scream pierced through the peaceful hush of Elko, Nevada, sending a flock of startled birds into the crimson-stained sky of 1875. Nora Lawson clutched the fraying edges of her shawl closer to her trembling body, her heart hammering against her chest as she backed away from the three men who had cornered her against the weathered wall of the abandoned mill on the outskirts of town. "Seems like you've wandered too far from home, pretty lady," the tallest of the men drawled, his tobacco-stained teeth visible beneath a poorly groomed mustache. "Dangerous place for a woman alone." Nora's throat constricted with fear, but she lifted her chin defiantly. At 22, she'd learned that showing weakness only invited more trouble. "My brother knows where I am. He'll be looking for me any minute now." The lie fell from her lips with practiced ease, though she doubted these men would believe her. She had no brother, no family at all in this dusty frontier town. Only 6 months had passed since she'd arrived in Elko to take up the position of schoolteacher, leaving behind the familiar comforts of Boston after her parents' passing had left her with nothing but debts and painful memories. The second man, shorter but broader in the shoulders, laughed cruelly. "Ain't nobody coming, sweetheart. We've been watching you for days. You live alone in that little house behind the school." The third man stepped forward, reaching for her arm. "Maybe we should teach the schoolmarm a different kind of lesson today." Nora's scream died in her throat as the distinctive click of a rifle being cocked echoed in the still air. LL let her go. The voice came from behind the men, steady despite the stutter. They turned, revealing to Nora a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. He stood with legs planted firmly apart, Winchester rifle aimed with unwavering precision. "Well, if it ain't stuttering Garrett Wells," the tall man sneered, though Nora noticed he'd taken a cautious step back. "This ain't your business, cowboy." Garrett's blue eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his worn Stetson. "I'm making it my business." His stutter was pronounced but did nothing to diminish the authority in his voice. "The L lady is coming with me. You gonna shoot all three of us, Wells?" The broad-shouldered man challenged, though his hand hovered uncertainly near his holster. "D don't need to." Garrett nodded slightly to his left and right. Only then did Nora notice the two mounted men who had silently positioned themselves on either side, both with rifles trained on her attackers. Ranch hands from their attire and the brand visible on their horses. The leader's face twisted with anger, but even he wasn't foolish enough to test those odds. "Fine, take her. She ain't worth the trouble anyway." Garrett remained motionless, rifle steady, as the three men backed away and eventually mounted their horses tethered nearby. Only when they had ridden well out of sight did he lower his weapon and approach Nora. "Are you hurt, Miss Lawson?" he asked, keeping a respectful distance. Nora recognized him then, the tall, quiet cowboy who sometimes brought cattle to the railroad depot. He'd nodded politely whenever their paths crossed in town, but they'd never exchanged words. His reputation preceded him, though. Skilled with horses, respected by the other ranchers despite his youth, and known for a stutter that had earned him both mockery and underestimation from those who didn't know better. "No, Mr. Wells, I'm unharmed thanks to you." Her voice trembled slightly as the danger she'd narrowly escaped fully registered. "How do you know my name?" A hint of color touched his tan cheeks. "Everyone KN knows the schoolteacher." His men approached, tipping their hats respectfully to Nora. The older of the two, a weathered man with kind eyes, spoke up. "Boss, we should get Miss Lawson back to town before dark." Garrett nodded, then turned to Nora with a questioning look. "And my horse's J just over that ridge, would you?" He seemed to struggle with the next words, then simply gestured toward his mount. Understanding dawned on Nora. "I'd be grateful for a ride back to town, Mr. Wells." Relief flickered across his face at not having to force out more words. He whistled sharply, and a magnificent chestnut stallion trotted over, its coat gleaming in the fading light. With surprising gentleness for his large frame, Garrett helped Nora onto the saddle before swinging up behind her. He was careful to maintain a proper distance, his arms reaching around her only to take the reins. "Thank you for trusting me," he said softly near her ear as they started moving. Those men, they've been causing trouble. Sheriff's been looking for them. I was gathering wildflowers for my classroom, Nora explained, feeling foolish now for venturing so far alone. I didn't realize I'd strayed so far from town, Garrett nodded. The land can be deceiving. Distances aren't what they seem. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the gentle rhythm of the horses' hooves creating a soothing cadence. Nora became increasingly aware of Garrett's presence behind her solid and reassuring without being intimidating. As the lights of Elko came into view, Nora turned slightly in the saddle. "Mr. Wells, I don't know how to thank you properly." Garrett's eyes met hers briefly before looking ahead again. "And no thanks needed, Miss Lawson. But there is," she insisted. "Those men, they might have." She couldn't finish the thought. "Your actions speak clearly enough," she said finally, the words coming from somewhere deep within her. Sometimes words aren't necessary at all. Something changed in his expression, then a softening, a vulnerable openness that transformed his entire face. For a moment he seemed about to speak, but then he simply nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When they reached the small house behind the schoolhouse that served as the teacher's residence, Garrett dismounted first and offered his hand to help Nora down. His calloused palm was warm against hers, the contact brief but leaving an impression that lingered. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" Nora asked impulsively. "It's the least I can offer after what you did for me." Hesitation flashed across his face, and for a moment Nora thought he might refuse. Then he turned to his men. "Our return to the ranch. I'll be along later." The older ranch hand nodded knowingly. "Take your time, boss. We'll see to the evening chores." As the men rode away, Garrett followed Nora to her door. She was suddenly conscious of her simple home, neat but modest, with books stacked on every available surface and a small writing desk by the window. "It's not much," she said apologetically as she lit the lamps. "It's nice," Garrett replied, removing his hat and running a hand through his sandy hair. "Reminds me of my mother's parlor. She loved books too." Something in his use of the past tense made Nora's heart ache. "Please sit down, I'll prepare the coffee." While the water boiled on her small stove, Nora observed Garrett from the corner of her eye. He moved with a natural grace that belied his large frame, examining her bookshelf with genuine interest. When he pulled out a volume of Whitman's poetry and smiled in recognition, Nora felt an unexpected connection forming. "You enjoy poetry, Mr. Wells?" she asked, bringing 2 steaming cups to the small table. He nodded, carefully returning the book to its place. My father thought it was a waste of time, but my mother used to read it to me, said it helped with my." He gestured vaguely toward his mouth, a shadow crossing his features. "Has the stutter been with you since childhood?" Nora asked gently, sensing his discomfort but curious nonetheless. Garrett's hands wrapped around the coffee cup. "Since I could talk, got worse after my parents died. Fever took them both when I was 16. He paused, seeming surprised at himself for sharing so much. "Sorry, you didn't ask for my life story." "I don't mind," Nora said truthfully. "Actually, I find it refreshing. Most people in town only want to talk about themselves." A genuine laugh escaped him, transforming his face. "That's true enough." They talked as the evening deepened, or rather, Nora talked and Garrett listened intently, responding with thoughtful comments when needed. She told him about growing up in Boston, losing her parents to influenza, and her decision to accept the teaching position in Nevada when her family home was sold to pay debts. "It was terrifying at first," she admitted. "Everything here is so vast, so untamed. But there's a freedom in it that I've come to love." Garrett nodded understanding. "The land gets in your blood. Can't imagine being anywhere else now." "How large is your ranch?" Nora asked, realizing she knew very little about him despite his apparent standing in the community. "The W," pride crept into his voice. 3,000 acres, just north of town. Was barely 500 when my uncle left it to me after my parents died. Built it up, acre by acre." Nora's eyes widened. "All on your own. Had good men working with me, and the land was kind." He hesitated, then added, "Would you like to see it sometime?" The invitation hung between them, weighted with possibility. Nora knew what such an invitation might suggest in this small community, a public association between the unmarried schoolteacher and the bachelor rancher would certainly cause talk. Yet looking at Garrett's open expression, free from presumption or pressure, Nora found herself nodding. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Wells." "Gee, Garrett," he corrected softly. "If you're coming to my home, you should call me Garrett." "Garrett," she repeated, the name feeling right on her lips. "And I'm Nora." He smiled, and in that moment, something shifted between them, a door opening to a future neither had anticipated when the day began. When Garrett finally stood to leave, the night had grown late. "ISH should go. Early start tomorrow." At the door, he hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small revolver. "Until those men are caught, would you keep this? Do you know how to use it?" The weapon was small but well crafted, inlaid with mother-of-pearl on the grip. Nora accepted it gingerly. "My father taught me, though I've never had cause to need such knowledge before." Relief crossed Garrett's features. "Gee, good, I hope you never do." He placed his hat back on his head. "I'll speak to the SH sheriff tomorrow about those men. Thank you, Garrett, for everything." He nodded, seemingly struggling with words again. Then, with a gentle tip of his hat, he was gone into the night, leaving Nora standing in her doorway, the weight of the revolver in her hand, a reminder of both danger and protection. As she closed her door, Nora found herself already anticipating their next meeting, wondering what other depths lay hidden behind Garrett Wells's measured silence and careful words. 2 days passed before Nora saw Garrett again. She'd just dismissed her students for the day when she spotted him waiting outside the schoolhouse, his tall figure leaning against a hitching post, 2 horses tethered nearby. "Good afternoon, Garrett," she called, pleasure warming her voice. He straightened immediately, removing his hat. "And Nora. Hope I'm not intruding." Several of her students giggled as they passed, eyeing the handsome rancher with undisguised curiosity. Nora felt a blush rise to her cheeks, knowing that word of this visit would spread through town before sunset. "Not at all. Is there news about those men?" Garrett nodded. "Sheriff C caught them trying to rob the stage coach yesterday. They're in jail now." Relief crossed his features. "You're safe." "Thanks to you," Nora replied. She noticed the second horse, then a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze down her nose. "Are you going somewhere?" "ITH thought, if you're not too tired after teaching." He gestured to the horses. "Perfect afternoon for that ranch visit, unless you'd rather wait for Sunday." The spontaneity of the suggestion delighted Nora. "Let me just gather my things. I'll only be a moment." When she returned with her shawl and a hastily pinned hat, Garrett helped her mount the mare with steady hands. "She's gentle. Name's Daisy." "She's beautiful," Nora said, stroking the horse's neck. "Is she yours?" "Raised her from foal," Garrett replied, mounting his own stallion. "Thought you might like her." They rode north out of town, past curious glances from townspeople who rarely saw their schoolteacher on horseback, much less in the company of the reserved rancher. Nora found she didn't mind the attention. There was something freeing about riding beside Garrett, the open country spreading before them. "I spoke with Mrs. Henderson at the Mercantile," Garrett mentioned as they left the town behind. "She saw us riding in the other evening, said some might talk." Nora glanced at him. "Does that concern you?" "Only if it concerns you," he replied honestly. "Being seen with man who can barely get a sentence out without stumbling." The vulnerability in his admission touched Nora deeply. "Garrett, I've had more meaningful conversation with you, despite what you call stumbling, than with most people who speak in perfectly fluid sentences. Words flow easily for many who have nothing worthwhile to say." He looked at her with such gratitude that Nora had to look away, her heart suddenly racing for reasons that had nothing to do with their pace. The Double W Ranch came into view as they crested a rolling hill, a sprawling property with a substantial 2-story house nestled against a backdrop of mountains. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and several outbuildings formed a courtyard near the main house. A bunkhouse sat some distance away, smoke rising from its chimney, It's magnificent, Nora breathed, taking in the scope of what Garrett had built. Pride shone in his eyes. It's home. As they approached, ranch hands called out greetings, several tipping their hats respectfully to Nora. The older man who had been with Garrett during her rescue approached, his weathered face breaking into a smile. Miss Lawson, pleasure to see you again. I'm Frank Miller, foreman here at the Double W. The pleasure's mine, Mr. Miller, Nora replied warmly. Boss mentioned he might be bringing you by, Frank continued with a knowing glance at Garrett. First lady visitor we've had in quite some time. Garrett's ears reddened slightly. Frank, W, would you see to the horses? I'd like to show Nora around. Of course, boss. Frank winked at Nora as he took the reins. Don't let him rush the tour, Miss Lawson. Place has quite a history. Garrett offered Nora his arm, which she accepted with a smile. He guided her through the property, his stutter noticeably diminishing as he explained the operations of the ranch, the breeding program he'd developed for stronger cattle, the water management system he'd designed, the orchards he'd planted that were just beginning to bear fruit. You've created something remarkable here, Nora said as they walked through a garden that reminded her of eastern estates rather than frontier ranches. And entirely your own vision. It helps to have something to say with your hands when your mouth won't cooperate, he replied, the self-deprecation softened by his gentle smile. The main house was equally impressive inside, comfortable rather than ostentatious, with solid furniture and unexpected touches of refinement. A piano stood in one corner of the parlor, shelves of books lined one wall, and landscape paintings brightened another. This is beautiful, Nora said, running her fingers along the piano keys. Do you play? Garrett shook his head. It was my mother's, couldn't bear to part with it, do you? A little, she admitted, though I'm desperately out of practice. Would you? The request hung unfinished, but Nora understood. She sat at the bench and began a simple melody, her fingers remembering more than she'd expected. The music filled the room, and when she glanced up, Garrett was watching her with an expression that made her heart skip a beat. You have graceful hands, he said quietly when she finished. The compliment, so unexpected and specific, warmed her more than extravagant praise might have. Thank you. A middle-aged woman with a kind face appeared at the doorway. Mr. Wells, dinner is ready whenever you and the lady would like to eat. Thank you, Mrs. Chen, Garrett replied, then explained to Nora, my housekeeper, best sea cook in 3 counties. The dining room was intimate rather than imposing, and Mrs. Chen had prepared a meal far more refined than Nora had expected on a ranch: roast beef with vegetables from the garden, fresh bread, and an apple pie that reminded Nora of home. This is wonderful, she told both Garrett and Mrs. Chen. I haven't eaten this well since leaving Boston, Mrs. Chen beamed. Mr. Wells said to make something special. First time he's brought a lady friend here. Garrett nearly choked on his water. Mrs. Chen. The housekeeper merely smiled and retreated to the kitchen, leaving them alone. I'm sorry about that, Garrett said, clearly embarrassed. Nora laughed softly. Don't be. I'm flattered to be considered special enough for the honor. As they ate, Nora noticed that Garrett's stutter diminished further as he grew more comfortable with her presence. By the time they finished dessert, he was stringing several sentences together with only occasional pauses. It's easier with you, he admitted when Nora commented on it. You don't finish my sentences or look away when I struggle, makes me less anxious. My father had a colleague who stuttered, Nora explained. He was the most brilliant doctor in Boston, but people often mistook his speech difficulty for mental slowness. It taught me not to judge too quickly. Garrett's expression turned thoughtful. Most people aren't so understanding. Especially out here where a man's words can be as important as his gun. Yet you've earned their respect, Nora observed. I've heard how the other ranchers speak of you. Took time, and proving myself over and over. A shadow crossed his face. Some still see me as my uncle's charity case, the stuttering orphan boy who got lucky. The bitterness in his voice revealed old wounds, and Nora felt a surge of protectiveness. They're wrong. What you've built here, this didn't come from luck. Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, an understanding that transcended the brief time they'd known each other. After dinner, they sat on the porch as the sun began to set, casting the landscape in gold and amber. The vastness of the land spread before them, peaceful and wild at once. "I should take you back soon," Garrett said reluctantly. "Wouldn't be proper to our return after dark." Nora nodded, though part of her wished to stay longer in this tranquil place with this unexpected man who had come to occupy her thoughts so completely in such a short time. As they rode back toward town in the fading light, Nora found herself watching Garrett's profile against the sunset, the strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful set of his mouth, the gentleness in his eyes when he glanced her way. "Thank you for today," she said as they approached her small house. "I haven't enjoyed myself so much since coming to Nevada," Garrett smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "The pleasure was mine, Nora, truly." When they reached her door, he helped her down from Daisy, his hands lingering slightly at her waist. The moment stretched between them, filled with possibility. "Would you like to come to church with me on Sunday?" he asked suddenly. "If you don't already have plans, that is." The invitation, so public, so meaningful in a small town, made Nora's heart flutter. "I'd be honored, Garrett." Relief and joy mingled in his expression. "I'll call for you at 10 then." As Garrett mounted his horse to leave, Nora watched him go with the distinct feeling that her life in Elko had just changed irrevocably and wonderfully. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Nora took special care with her appearance, choosing her best blue dress and arranging her dark hair with more attention than usual. By the time Garrett's knock came at her door, her stomach was fluttering with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He stood on her porch looking handsomer than she'd ever seen him, clean-shaven, his sandy hair neatly combed, wearing a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. For a moment, he seemed equally struck by the sight of her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Nora smiled, touched by his sincere compliment. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Wells." He offered his arm, and together they walked through town toward the white clapboard church. Nora was acutely aware of the glances and whispers that followed them, the bachelor rancher and the schoolteacher, walking together in their Sunday best. Mrs. Henderson from the mercantile nodded approvingly as they passed. The blacksmith's wife whispered something to her husband. Sheriff Thompson tipped his hat with a knowing smile. "Everyone's looking," Nora murmured, though not uncomfortably. Garrett's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "Let them look. I'm proud to walk beside you." The simple declaration warmed Nora to her core. At the church steps, they were greeted by the pastor, whose raised eyebrows suggested his surprise at seeing the normally solitary rancher with a companion. Inside, Garrett led Nora to a pew near the back. As they settled in, Frank and several other ranch hands entered, nodding respectfully to their boss before taking seats nearby. Nora realized with a start that they were forming a protective presence, not because of any danger, but out of loyalty to Garrett. The service passed in a blur for Nora, her awareness centered on Garrett, beside her the rich baritone of his singing voice, surprisingly smooth without the pressure of conversation. The warmth of his arm occasionally brushing hers, the reverent attention he paid to the sermon. When they stood to sing the final hymn, Garrett's voice faltered on a particular verse. Nora gently found his place in the hymnal with her finger, and he shot her a grateful glance. The small moment of connection felt more intimate than any words could have been. After the service, they could not avoid the social gathering on the church lawn. Women who had barely acknowledged Nora before suddenly found reasons to introduce themselves. Men who typically nodded curtly to Garrett now engaged him in conversation, watching with poorly concealed curiosity as he navigated his responses. Through it all, Garrett remained at Nora's side, his quiet presence a steady anchor. When his stutter worsened under the pressure of so many eyes and ears, Nora smoothly entered conversations, giving him time to collect himself without drawing attention to his struggle. "You're good at that," he murmured as they finally extracted themselves from the crowd, making things easier. "We make a good team," Nora replied simply, The words hung between them, weighted with possibility as they walked slowly back toward her house. When they reached her door, Garrett seemed reluctant to leave. "Would you like to come in for lunch?" Nora offered. "It's nothing fancy, but I baked bread yesterday." Garrett's smile was answer enough. The simple meal they shared that afternoon marked the beginning of a courtship that bloomed throughout the spring and early summer of 1875. Every Sunday, Garrett escorted Nora to church. At least twice during the week, he would appear at the schoolhouse after lessons ended, sometimes to invite her for a ride, other times simply to walk her home. Nora began visiting the Double W regularly, getting to know the ranch hands and Mrs. Chen, learning the rhythms of ranch life. She brought books to share with Garrett during quiet evenings on his porch, sometimes reading aloud as the sun set over the mountains. On warm evenings, they would ride to a hilltop overlooking the valley, where Garrett told her stories of his childhood, of his dreams for the ranch, of the struggles he'd faced after his parents' deaths. His stutter remained, but it eased in her presence, words flowing more freely as his comfort with her deepened. Nora, in turn, shared her own hopes and fears, her uncertainty about her future, her loneliness before coming to Elko, her growing attachment to the wild beauty of Nevada and its people. The townspeople watched their courtship with interest that gradually transformed into approval. The schoolteacher and the stuttering rancher made an unexpected pair, but even the most skeptical observer could see the genuine connection between them. In late June, during one of their hillside conversations, Garrett turned to Nora with unusual seriousness. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you." Nora's heart quickened. "Yes, the school term ends next week, doesn't it?" She nodded, uncertain where this was leading. "Yes, though I've already signed the contract for next year." Relief flickered across his face. "Good, I was worried you might return east for the summer." "This is my home now," Nora said softly. "I have no desire to leave." Garrett reached for her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "I'm glad." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "There's a social at the town hall next Saturday to celebrate Independence Day early. Would you go with me?" The request seemed oddly formal given the time they'd already spent together, but something in Garrett's expression told Nora this invitation carried special significance. "I'd love to," she replied, squeezing his hand. He nodded, satisfaction and something like relief crossing his features. "Mrs. Chenham mentioned there would be dancing." Understanding dawned on Nora. "Are you asking if I know how to dance, Garrett Wells?" A rare, full laugh escaped him. "I'm wondering if you'd mind dancing with a man who might step on your toes." Nora's heart melted at his vulnerability. "I suspect you're more graceful than you let on. But yes, I would be honored to dance with you, regardless of the state of my toes afterward." The smile that lit his face was worth any number of bruised feet. The town hall was transformed for the Independence Day social. Red, white, and blue bunting draped from the ceiling, tables laden with food prepared by the women of Elko, and a small band of local musicians setting up in one corner. Nora wore her best dress, a deep green that brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes, and Garrett arrived in a crisp white shirt and dark vest that made him look every inch the successful rancher he was. "You take my breath away," he said simply when she opened her door. The social was in full swing when they arrived, and heads turned as they entered together. By now, their courtship was common knowledge, but this marked their first formal appearance at a town event as a couple. Sheriff Thompson approached immediately, shaking Garrett's hand firmly. "Wells, good to see you. Miss Lawson, you're looking lovely this evening." "Thank you, Sheriff," Nora replied. "Has there been any word about when those men might stand trial?" The sheriff's expression darkened. "Judge arrives next week." "Those three won't be troubling anyone for a long while, I can promise you that." As the evening progressed, Nora found herself enjoying the community spirit of the celebration. She chatted with parents of her students, exchanged recipes with the minister's wife, and listened with genuine interest as the elderly Mr. Simmons recounted tales of Elko's early days. Through it all, Garrett remained close, his quiet presence a comfort even when they weren't directly conversing. Nora noticed how the other men treated him with increasing respect, seeking his opinion on matters of town business and the upcoming cattle season. When the band began to play, Garrett turned to Nora with a questioning look. She nodded, placing her hand in his outstretched palm. He led her to the center of the floor, other couples making room for them. As his arm encircled her waist, Nora was suddenly aware of their physical proximity in a way she hadn't been before. The solid warmth of him, the subtle scent of soap and leather, the surprising gentleness of his touch all combined to make her heart race. "I practiced," he confessed quietly as they began to move to the music. With Mrs. Chen, she was very patient. The image of the serious rancher practicing dance steps with his housekeeper made Nora smile. "Your secret is safe with me." To her delight, Garrett proved to be an excellent dancer, guiding her smoothly around the floor with confidence that belied his earlier concerns. "You misled me, Mr. Wells," Nora teased as they completed their second dance without incident. "You dance beautifully." "Good teacher," he replied with a wink, and Nora's heart fluttered at this playful side of him she was still discovering. As the evening wore on, they danced several more times, joined the various conversations around the hall, and enjoyed the plentiful food. Near midnight, when the celebration showed no signs of winding down, Garrett leaned close to Nora's ear. "Would you like to step outside for some air?" The summer night was warm and star-filled as they escaped the crowded hall. Garrett guided Nora to a quiet spot beneath an old oak tree, where the music from inside was still audible but muted. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked, his stutter barely noticeable in the comfortable privacy between them. "Very much," Nora replied honestly. "Though I'm enjoying the company more than the event itself." Garrett's smile was visible even in the dim light. He reached for her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Nora, there's something I need to say." The seriousness in his tone made her pulse quicken. "Yes." He took a deep breath as if gathering his courage. "I've never been good with words. Even if I didn't stutter, I'm not a poet or a smooth-talking salesman." Garrett, Nora began, but he shook his head. "Please, let me finish. I need to say this." She nodded, waiting. "That day when I found you by the old mill, I'd noticed you before, in town, at church. You were always so poised, so kind to everyone. I wanted to speak to you, but—" He gestured vaguely toward his mouth, a familiar frustration crossing his features. "I was afraid my words would fail me, that you'd think less of me." Nora squeezed his hand encouragingly. "When I heard you scream that day, nothing else mattered. Not my stutter, not what anyone might think, just keeping you safe." His blue eyes held hers intently. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. You've given me something I never thought I'd have, someone who listens to what I'm trying to say, not just how I say it." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Nora's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a delicate gold ring with a single perfect pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "I'm asking you with both my words and my actions, Nora Lawson. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in Nora's eyes as the full weight of the moment settled around her. This man, this kind, strong, remarkable man who had entered her life so unexpectedly, was offering her not just his heart, but a future she hadn't dared imagine for herself. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Garrett Wells, I will marry you." Joy transformed his face as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then lifted her hand to his lips in a gentle kiss. When he straightened, Nora reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I love you," she said simply. "Every word, every silence, every action." "And I love you," he replied, the declaration coming without a single stutter. When he lowered his head to kiss her, it felt like the culmination of a journey that had begun that fateful day outside the abandoned mill, a journey that had led them both to a place neither had expected to find. The kiss deepened, tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, the music from the town hall seemed to have faded into the background, leaving only the sound of the night around them and the beating of their hearts. "Shall we go back inside and share our news?" Nora asked, though part of her wanted to keep this perfect moment private a little longer. Garrett nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I want everyone to know that the most wonderful woman in Nevada has agreed to be my wife." Hand in hand, they walked back toward the light and music of the celebration, stepping together into the future they would create. News of Garrett and Nora's engagement spread through Elko like wildfire, meeting with enthusiastic approval from most quarters. The following Sunday, they received so many congratulations at church that Garrett's stutter returned with a vengeance. Though Nora noticed he pushed through it with new determination, refusing to let his speech impede his joy. They agreed on an August wedding, giving them just enough time for preparations without an unnecessarily long engagement. Mrs. Chen took charge of readying the main house at the W, while Nora began the bittersweet task of packing her few belongings from the teacher's residence. "Will you continue teaching after we're married?" Garrett asked one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset. Nora had been pondering this question herself. "Would you mind if I did, at least through this next year? I've made a commitment to the children." Relief crossed his features. "I was hoping you'd say that. I don't want you to give up something that brings you joy." "The ranch is quite a distance for a daily commute," Nora mused. "Perhaps we should consider alternatives for the winter months." Garrett nodded thoughtfully. "The old Peterson place is for sale. It's just at the edge of town but still has 10 acres. Could be a winter house for us, closer to the school." The casual way he referenced such a significant purchase, a second home, just to make her work more convenient, reminded Nora of how drastically her circumstances had changed since accepting his proposal. "Garrett, that's too extravagant," she protested. "I could rent rooms in town during the week if necessary," he frowned. "My wife will not live apart from me if I can help it. Besides, I've been looking for land closer to town anyway, for expanding the breeding pea program." His practicality made her smile. "Well, when you put it that way, Mr. Wells, how can I refuse?" In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Nora discovered new facets of the man she was to marry. Garrett's business acumen impressed her as she watched him negotiate the purchase of the Peterson property and arrange for renovations to be completed before winter. His generosity touched her heart when he donated lumber and labor to repair the schoolhouse roof without being asked. His unexpected playfulness delighted her during evening rides when he would challenge her to impromptu races across open meadows. Most of all, she treasured the quiet moments Garrett reading aloud from her favorite novels, his stutter almost non-existent when reciting someone else's words, his patient explanations of ranch operations as he included her in more aspects of his business, the gentle way he listened when she spoke of her hopes for her students and her ideas for improving education in Elko. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect on the third Saturday in August. The ceremony would take place at the church, followed by a celebration at the W that promised to be the social event of the year. Nora prepared in a guest room at the Peterson place, which Garrett had insisted on completing first so she would have somewhere comfortable to ready herself. Mrs. Henderson and the minister's wife helped her dress in the elegant gown that had arrived from San Francisco just days before, ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, more refined than anything Elko had ever seen. "You look like an angel, dear Mrs. Henderson declared, adjusting Nora's veil. "Garrett Wells won't know what hit him." A knock at the door revealed Sheriff Thompson, who had agreed to escort Nora to the church in the absence of her father. His eyes widened at the sight of her. "Miss Lawson, you're a vision. Wells is the luckiest man in Nevada today." The church was filled beyond capacity when they arrived, townspeople mingling with ranchers from miles around, all gathered to witness the union of the schoolteacher and the stuttering rancher whose unlikely romance had captured their imaginations. As the music began and Nora started her walk down the aisle, her eyes found Garrett waiting at the altar. The look on his face, wonder, love, disbelief, made her heart soar. He stood tall and proud in a new black suit, Frank at his side as best man, his blue eyes never leaving hers as she approached. When Sheriff Thompson placed her hand in Garrett's, the connection between them felt electric. His fingers tightened around hers, warm and reassuring. The minister's words washed over them as they stood together, but it was Garrett's voice that Nora focused on when the time came for their vows. Clear and strong, with only the slightest hesitation, he promised to love, honor, and cherish her for all the days of his life. When Nora spoke her own vows, she saw tears glistening in Garrett's eyes, tears he made no effort to hide or brush away. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Garrett's kiss was gentle yet profound, a public declaration of a love that had grown from the most unexpected of beginnings. As they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Wells, for the first time, the cheers that erupted seemed to shake the very foundations of the small church. The celebration at the Double W exceeded even Mrs. Chen's meticulous planning. Tables laden with food stretched across the yard, a dance floor had been constructed beneath a canopy of Chinese lanterns, and a proper band from Reno played lively music that kept guests dancing well into the evening. "Are you happy, Mrs. Wells?" Garrett asked as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. Nora looked up at the man who had changed her life so completely in just a few short months. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." As darkness fell and stars appeared overhead, the celebration showed no signs of abating. Eventually, Garrett led Nora away from the revelry toward a waiting carriage decorated with ribbons and flowers. "Where are we going?" Nora asked, though she had a suspicion. Garrett smiled mysteriously. "You'll see." The carriage took them not to the main house as Nora had expected, but along a winding path to a part of the property she hadn't visited before. As they crested a small hill, she gasped at the sight that greeted them. A cottage stood in a clearing surrounded by aspen trees, windows glowing with warm light, smoke curling from the chimney. It was smaller than the main house but exquisitely crafted, with a wide porch and carefully tended flower beds. "What is this place?" Nora asked as Garrett helped her from the carriage. "Our home," he replied simply. "If you'll like it." Emotion welled in Nora's throat as understanding dawned. "You built this for us?" Garrett nodded, suddenly looking uncertain. "The main house is fine for entertaining and business, but I wanted somewhere that would be just ours. Somewhere private, away from ranch hands and visitors." Nora was speechless as he led her up the path to the porch. Flowers she recognized from her classroom bouquets lined the walkway he had noticed and remembered her favorites. "Frank and the men helped with the heavy work," Garrett continued, his words flowing more freely in his eagerness to explain. "But I did the finishing touches myself. The woodwork, the windows." At the threshold he paused, then swept Nora into his arms with surprising ease. "Tradition," he said with a smile, carrying her across the doorstep. The interior took Nora's breath away, polished wood floors, a stone fireplace with a cheerful blaze already lit, comfortable furniture arranged for conversation rather than formality. Bookshelves lined one wall, already filled with volumes from both their collections. "The bedroom is through there," Garrett said, setting her gently on her feet and gesturing to a doorway. "And there's a small study for you for preparing lessons." The kitchen isn't as grand as the main house, but Nora silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her emotion into the connection between them. When they finally parted, both breathless, she rested her forehead against his. "It's perfect, Garrett, absolutely perfect." Relief and joy mingled in his expression. "I wanted our first night as husband and wife to be here, in our own place." The intimacy of the moment, the realization that they were truly alone for the first time as husband and wife, brought a flush to Nora's cheeks. Garrett noticed, his expression softening as he reached to gently remove a pin from her hair. "You are so beautiful," he whispered, carefully continuing to free her dark locks until they fell in waves around her shoulders. "I still can't believe you're my wife." "Believe it," Nora replied, her voice husky with emotion. "I am yours, Garrett Wells, as you are mine." His kiss this time was different, deeper, more urgent, filled with a passion they had kept carefully restrained during their courtship. Nora responded in kind, her hands sliding up his chest to his shoulders as he drew her closer. "I love you," he murmured against her lips, "more than I have words to express." "Then show me," Nora whispered, her heart racing with anticipation and love. And in the privacy of the cottage he had built with his own hands, Garrett did exactly that, speaking through touch and tenderness in a language that required no words at all. The first year of marriage brought adjustments for both Nora and Garrett, but their deep connection made each challenge easier to overcome. Nora continued teaching while also learning the intricacies of being a rancher's wife. Garrett divided his time between the main ranch and their winter home near town, his business expanding as his confidence grew. By spring, they had settled into a rhythm that accommodated both their needs, weekdays spent mostly at the Peterson place, so Nora could teach, weekends and holidays at the ranch where Garrett could oversee operations more directly. The cottage remained their special retreat, a private sanctuary they escaped to whenever possible. It was in that cottage, as wildflowers began to bloom across the Nevada landscape, that Nora shared news that would change their lives once again. "I've been to see Dr. Thompson," she said one evening as they sat before the fire, Garrett's arm around her shoulders. Concern immediately creased his brow. "Are you ill? You've seemed tired lately." Nora smiled, placing her hand over his. "Not ill, my love. I'm going to have a baby." Garrett froze, his expression shifting from worry to wonder in an instant. "A baby, you're certain?" "The doctor is quite sure. We'll welcome our child in late November." For a moment, Garrett seemed unable to speak, overcome by emotion. Then, with gentle reverence, he placed his hand on Nora's still flat abdomen. "A child," he whispered. "Our child." Tears glistened in his eyes as he looked up at her. "I love you, Nora Wells. You have made me the happiest man alive." The months that followed were filled with preparations and planning. Nora arranged for a substitute teacher to take over her class after October. Garrett modified the cottage, adding a nursery adjacent to their bedroom, insisting on doing most of the work himself. Word spread throughout Elko, and gifts began arriving: handmade blankets, tiny clothing, a beautifully crafted cradle from Frank and the ranch hands. Mrs. Chen spent hours teaching Nora old Chinese recipes said to ensure a healthy mother and child. As Nora's body changed, Garrett's protective instincts intensified. He insisted on accompanying her to and from school, fretted when she seemed tired, and spent hours reading aloud to both her and the unborn child from books about parenting he'd specially ordered from San Francisco. "What if our child inherits my stutter?" he asked one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively over her growing belly. Nora turned to face him in the dim light. "Then we will love them and support them, just as we love and support each other." "It's not an easy life," Garrett said softly, "being different." "No," Nora agreed, touching his face gently. "But you've shown me that challenges can make us stronger, more compassionate. Whatever gifts or struggles our child inherits, they will have two parents who understand that worth isn't measured by society's narrow standards." Garrett kissed her then, a kiss full of gratitude and love. "How did I get so lucky?" "It wasn't luck," Nora replied. "It was that day at the mill, your courage, your kindness. You showed me who you truly are, Garrett Wells." November arrived with unusual gentleness, the weather remaining mild as Nora's time grew near. She had stopped teaching the previous month, dividing her time between preparing for the baby and helping with the ranch's accounts, discovering a talent for business that complemented Garrett's practical knowledge. The pains began in the early hours of a Tuesday morning. Garrett, who had been sleeping lightly for weeks in anticipation of this moment, was instantly alert. "It's time," Nora said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the fear that gripped her. Garrett moved with practiced efficiency, having rehearsed this moment in his mind countless times. He helped Nora dress warmly, then carried her to the waiting wagon he'd kept prepared. One of the ranch hands was dispatched to fetch Dr. Thompson, while another rode ahead to alert Mrs. Chen. Everything will be fine, Garrett assured her as they made their way to the main house where they'd agreed the birth should take place. You're strong, Nora, so strong. The labor was long and difficult. Garrett refused to leave Nora's side despite tradition dictating that men wait elsewhere. His stutter worsened with worry, but he continued murmuring encouragement, wiping her brow, supporting her through each contraction. I see can't lose you, he whispered during a particularly difficult moment when the doctor's expression had grown concerned. Please, Nora, stay with me. I'm not going anywhere, she promised through gritted teeth, drawing strength from his presence. As dawn broke over the ranch, their son entered the world with a robust cry that seemed to release all the tension from the room. Doctor. Thompson placed the squalling infant on Nora's chest, his tiny face red with the effort of his first breaths. A healthy boy, the doctor announced, smiling at the new parents. Strong lungs on that one. Garrett stared in wonder at the small bundle, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. When Nora offered their son to him, he took the baby with hands that trembled slightly, cradling him as if he were made of the most delicate glass. Hello, son, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm your father. The infant quieted at the sound of Garrett's voice, tiny fingers wrapping around one of his father's large ones with surprising strength. What shall we call him? Nora asked, exhausted but radiant. Garrett looked from his son to his wife, overwhelming love for both filling his heart to bursting. William, he said without a hint of stutter. After my father, William Thomas Wells. It's perfect, Nora agreed. Little Will. As the winter of 1876 settled over Nevada, the Wells family established new rhythms around the needs of their son. Will prove to be a cheerful baby with Garrett's blue eyes and Nora's dark hair, his personality already showing signs of both parents' determination. Garrett took to fatherhood with natural ease, never hesitating to change diapers or walk the floor with a fussy infant. His stutter, which had improved steadily throughout his marriage to Nora, became almost non-existent when he spoke to his son, a fact that brought Nora quiet joy. Spring arrived with new beginnings beyond just the season. Nora, who had initially planned to return to teaching, made the decision to focus on the ranch and their family instead. Are you certain? Garrett asked when she broached the subject. Teaching bee brings you such happiness. So does our family, Nora replied, watching as he rocked Will to sleep by the fire. The school will find another teacher, but you and Will are irreplaceable. Besides, I've been thinking of starting a small school here on the ranch for the children of our hands and neighboring properties. Something less formal but perhaps more practical for frontier life. The idea took root and flourished. By summer, Nora had established a school in one of the outbuildings, teaching not only reading and arithmetic, but also practical skills suited to life in Nevada. Garrett supported her fully, providing materials and encouraging his ranch hands to send their children. The Double W prospered under their joint stewardship. Garrett's vision combined with Nora's organizational skills, creating a ranch known throughout the region for both its quality cattle and its progressive practices. They hired married couples whenever possible, built proper housing for their workers, and established fair wages that earned them loyal employees. As Will grew from infant to toddler to energetic boy, the Wells family expanded again with the birth of a daughter, Emma Grace, in the summer of 1878. Unlike her brother, who chattered constantly from an early age without a trace of his father's stutter, Emma was more reserved, observing the world with thoughtful eyes that reminded everyone of her father. She's going to be the smart one, Garrett often said proudly. Watching everything, figuring it all out before she makes her move. Life was not without challenges. Drought struck the region in 1879, forcing difficult decisions about herd sizes and grazing lands. Tension with some neighboring ranchers arose over water rights, requiring Garrett to stand firm while seeking fair compromises. Illness swept through Elko one winter, touching their family when Will developed a dangerous fever that left them sleepless with worry for days. Yet through each trial, the foundation Nora and Garrett had built remained solid, a partnership based on mutual respect, unwavering support. and a love that continued to deepen with time. On a golden afternoon in the autumn of 1880, they stood together on the porch of their cottage, watching 5-year-old Will teaching his little sister how to pet a gentle pony Garrett had acquired especially for the children. "You ever think about that day at the mill?" Nora asked, leaning against her husband's solid frame. "How differently our lives might have gone if you hadn't come along when you did." Garrett's arm tightened around her waist. "I thank God every day for leading me there at that exact moment." He turned to face her, his blue eyes as clear and honest as they had been the day he proposed. "You said something that day that changed everything for me." "What was that?" Nora asked, trying to recall the exact conversation through the haze of fear and relief that had colored the memory. "You said my actions spoke clearly enough," Garrett reminded her. "No one had ever looked past my stutter that way before seeing what I was trying to communicate beyond the W words that failed me." Nora smiled, reaching up to touch his beloved face. "Your actions have always spoken volumes, Garrett Wells. The ranch you've built, the family you've created, the love you've shown us all, they tell a story more eloquent than any speech could be." "I still struggle sometimes," he admitted, "when I'm tired or stressed or am meeting new people." "And yet you never let it stop you," Nora replied. "That's what our children are learning from you, not that difficulties don't exist, but that they don't define us." Their conversation was interrupted by Will's excited call. "Pa, Ma, look, Emma's riding by herself." They turned to see their daughter sitting proudly on the pony, her small hands gripping the mane, her brother leading the animal in careful circles. "We should get the camera," Nora suggested, referring to the photographic equipment Garrett had recently purchased. "This is a moment worth preserving." As Garrett fetched the camera and patiently set it up to capture the image of their children, Nora watched him with a heart full to overflowing. This man, who had once worried that his words weren't enough, had created a life that spoke volumes, a legacy of love, courage, and quiet strength that would echo through generations. Later that evening, as they tucked their children into bed in the main house where they now spent most nights, Will asked for the story he never tired of hearing. "Tell about how you rescued Ma from the bad men, Pa," he requested, his eyes bright with anticipation. Garrett settled into the chair between the children's beds, his stutter barely noticeable as he recounted the tale they had sanitized for young ears, a story of a chance meeting, a timely rescue, and words that weren't necessary for understanding. "And then Ma said the smartest thing anyone ever said to me," he concluded, winking at Nora, who stood in the doorway. "She said my actions spoke clearly enough." "What does that mean, Pa?" Emma asked, her 4-year-old brow furrowed in concentration. Garrett considered how to explain it to a child. "It means that what we do matters more than what we say, that people who truly see us look at our hearts, not just listen to our words." Will nodded sagely. "Like when I broke Ma's vase but then used my allowance to buy her flowers." "Exactly like that," Nora confirmed with a smile. "Actions tell the true story of who we are." As the children drifted toward sleep, Garrett joined Nora in the hallway, pulling her gently into his embrace. "Our story's a good one," he murmured against her hair. "Better than any book." "And still being written," Nora replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "With new chapters every day." In the years that followed, the W Ranch continued to prosper and grow. Will followed in his father's footsteps, showing an innate understanding of the land and the cattle that roamed it. Emma, as predicted, revealed a brilliant mind that eventually led her to become one of the first female physicians in Nevada. The cottage remained Garrett and Nora's special retreat long after their children were grown, a place to reconnect with each other, and the love story that had begun with a rescue, a stutter, and words that proved less important than the actions behind them. And on quiet evenings, when grandchildren gathered at their feet begging for stories, Garrett would always begin the same way. "I wasn't looking for love that day outside the old mill, but sometimes life gives you exactly what you need when you least expect it." Nora would squeeze his hand then, a lifetime of understanding passing between them without a single word needed.